This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. And whilst I do record this virtually, I could have probably invited my next guest in for a good old-fashioned Manchester cup of tea. And it's a fellow Northerner that's joining me today, and it's somebody that I've had the absolute pleasure to speak to on numerous occasions in real life and on the phone, in many guises. We've been connected for a really long time, and I cannot wait for you, our global community, to get to know her today, especially because we're going to be talking about some, I think, very poignant, evergreen, and really quite controversial topics as well, I hope. So without further ado, this is Briony Platt, who is the founder of Lean Into Learning. Welcome to you today. How are you?
Thanks so much, Lisa. Lisa, I'm really good, thank you.
Well, it's very nice of you to join us here. Now, obviously, I know who you are and what you do, but there'll be plenty of people clicking on this podcast link now because they've seen the hook, wanting to know what you do.
Absolutely.
Give us an overview of your history and how you've ended up being Lean Into Learning.
So I've been in and around the recruitment industry for over 25 years. Started as a grad trainee with Michael Page, worked with them, did finance recruitment, moved into an HR recruitment role, managed an HR recruitment team based in London, and then over time transitioned into a learning and development role. And I did that completely by accident. In the same way that loads of people fall into recruitment, I fell into the learning and development job. Came back into the office one day, and our resourcer said, "Have you met any good trainers recently?" And I was recruiting HR people at the time, so that was quite a sensible question to ask me. And when she explained it was for an internal role to move into our own learning development team, I didn't tell her anything and went straight up to the training manager and said, "I want to apply."
I
So
love
that's how I moved into it. Was training recruiters for quite a few years, and then moved into doing what I spend nearly all of my time nowadays doing, which is supporting managers and leaders. Um, so having worked in a couple of different environments doing that learning and development role, my last employed role was a head of learning and development um, position for a business that grew from just over 200 to 430 people in the two and a
Wow.
half years I was with them. So that was
Right.
a pretty big job with lots of different things to do. And then decided that I was going to set up for myself, primarily so that I could focus at the level that I wanted to focus on, which is working with managers and leaders, because I like the ripple or multiplier effect that you get from doing that, knowing that you're working with maybe a fairly small group, but knowing that that is going to impact on quite a lot of people from doing that.
Yeah. I can see the strategy behind that. And in terms of the learning and development that you do you go and do it in person or is it virtually or both?
I do a mixture.
Yeah.
So some of it is virtual. If I'm running a program with a business, I tend to suggest or strongly recommend that at least some of it is done face to face, unless those people already know each other quite well.
Mm.
Because I think businesses miss out on the benefit of getting that kind of peer network of managers working together on a program.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get quite the same impact if you're doing it virtually as you do face to face. But I also recognise that logistically, it can make a lot of sense for at least part of the program to be done virtually. So I tend to do either completely face to face or some that are a hybrid approach to it.
Combination of both. And I'm really interested that, I think it's embracing the technology that's available to you. But I agree with you totally. When I did my first lot of management training back in, gosh, this is like 20 odd years ago at Fee Farah Jones, I did it with a peer group of managers
Yeah,
who were based in London. I was the only one. I ran the Manchester office, and I'm still friends with those people to this
yeah,
day. They create an amazing cohort of
yeah,
people, and I just think it means you don't feel isolated in your learning. So I
100%.
think it's really important. And just from a creativity point of view, and it's good for the founders then to benchmark, let's be crude about it. Which one's really elevating themselves, which
Yeah.
one's benefiting. So I can see why, and it's really great to get a perspective. I'm not sure in all the time I've been running the podcast actually, which is now season 5, believe it or not. I don't think I've ever had a training specialist on like yourself who focuses on that leadership as opposed to more sort of either general or on the sort of entry level. So I think that's great because I forgot to mention before we started recording, but most of our listeners tend to fall into that leadership bracket.
Yeah.
So I think this will really resonate. So, okay, the billing manager. I think I'm going to put this out here, Brian, and I don't know if you'll agree with me or not. I think it is the hardest job in the recruitment industry. What are
And
your
I would 100% agree with you.
okay?
I
What,
think as soon
what
as you move up into a role that's higher than the billing manager, where there's less onus on you to create your own revenue or as much of your own revenue, I think it becomes easier. I wholeheartedly agree. The hardest job is that billing manager role.
And why? I mean, I moved into a billing manager role, as I say, 20 odd years ago. And I would say my bread and butter probably is senior billing managers, but they still have a commercial target. Why are we so reluctant to, I guess, not just support, but recognize that it is the hardest job? And what else could we do as business leaders to take away some of that horror of being a billing manager? Because it's that I've always said it's two jobs.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Um, I think if we did separate it, there might not be as many people wanting to do it because I'm not quite sure how you'd then remunerate it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tricky one. I've seen it separated to a degree in
Yeah.
some businesses where the business developed. There was in Hudson when I was working for them, we had a people management route, we had a business management or sales management route.
Yeah.
But whenever times were hard, the people that were cut were the people that weren't responsible for people. So I think there was a reluctance for a
Mhm.
lot of people to take that route beyond a kind of principal consultant level for fear of what might happen to them further down the line. Um, and it makes no strategic sense, in my opinion, to have got rid of the high performing, more senior salespeople. But that was my humble opinion, I guess.
Now you see,
Um,
on the flip side, as a rectorate, I saw it the other side in any downturn, particularly in the 2008 recession and then the sort of post-COVID bubble that burst in 2023, is it's the ones that aren't the salespeople, but the ones who are purely the people managers, they're the ones that tend to get cut. And I think
Interesting.
it's very interesting. And they're the ones that, are seen as more dispensable
Mm,
because they're not running a commercial, they're not in touch with the stakeholders externally. They're not literally running a revenue desk. But I think, to go back to your first point, how do you remunerate somebody who is in a leadership role that hasn't actually got an actual desk? Well, surely it's just on that net profit.
it's on
It's
performance.
driving the net
Yeah,
profit.
yeah, it's on performance. And that's where the kind of contradiction with the role or the conflict, internal conflict for the person doing the role comes from, in my opinion, that and I've seen it so often over the years, when the revenue for the team isn't quite where it needs to be,
Yeah.
then prioritizing the revenue that they can generate themselves, that they've got 100% control over, as opposed to developing the team to generate their own revenue. And it's a really short-term approach to it. Yes, it might get the figures on the board for that particular month or that particular quarter,
Yeah.
but it's not sustainable long term.
No, it's not. It's the cash cow scenario, isn't it? And I
Yeah.
think I often advise my clients when they do ask me quite, because they often want to hire in a billing manager. That's probably the most common job brief that people come
Mm,
to me for, particularly because I'm, working at that senior leadership level. And I will often muse and say, I think from a behavior perspective, a good billing manager naturally is probably quite equal balance of altruism, but also has a need to earn money. But I
yeah.
think that's where you can, especially with a lot of the newer schemes on things like EOT, you can really pull somebody in and keep hold of them and retain them by letting them see that bigger picture, but not at the I guess at the risk of their initial earnings. It's a
Mm.
very fine balance. And I think so when you're in a room full of billing managers, the ones that do it successfully, the ones that seem to have that harmony between their own revenue and managing the team, what, if you could, what are the key skills and attributes that they have?
That are different to the people who aren't successfully managing it.
Yes.
I probably see, maybe I'm being controversial by saying this, but I probably see more people who are struggling with it.
Right.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be working with them.
True.
Because if they were succeeding at it wholeheartedly, they probably wouldn't need my support. Hopefully, towards the end of a program, I start to see more success with it.
Mm,
Um, but I think it comes down to behaviors and mindset. It's
mm,
having been set up for the role in the right way and having the right motivations to do it. Um, if you think about high billers, the vast majority of them, let's face it, will be doing it because they're really driven. They like the money it creates.
yeah.
You use the word altruistic. I'm going to flip that and say, really successful high billers tend to be very self-focused, almost to the point of being a bit selfish.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them really great at the job.
Yeah.
So to then ask them to balance that out with spending their time with people, developing their people, um, losing a bit of control by getting their people to do it as opposed to doing it themselves is a tricky kind of balance to ask them to achieve. So the people who are doing it successfully, I think, are doing the management role for, I want to say, the right reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe that comes back to why I did it.
Yeah.
Um, I would never say I was massively money motivated. I liked money.
Yeah.
I liked what I could do with the money, but the
Hmm.
money to me showed me that I'd done a good job. So I found it reasonably easy to transition into a manager's role where realistically my earnings went down for a couple of years because I saw new indicators of doing a good job.
Yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily what it said on my commission statement at the end of a quarter. It was what I could see on my team commission statements at the end of a quarter. And I still had enough money to be happy
Yeah.
with what I was doing. So I think a lot of it comes down to what motivates them, what's important to them, and that kind of mindset shift that I think a lot of them have to take. And outside of that, it's then balancing the time.
Yeah. Well,
So it's making sure that they're structured with what they do with the people,
yeah.
um, that they're sharing with their team what they're looking to achieve that day. So not just what are you up to, what are your deadlines, what are you
Yeah.
prioritizing, but this is what I'm focusing on. And essentially, the undercurrent is for the next few hours, you need to leave me to do my job, and
Yeah.
I'll check back in with you at 11 o'clock, lunchtime, whatever it might be, and make sure that I can help you move what you're doing to the next stage if you then need my help. So
Yeah.
I think it's being really structured and disciplined with
Mhm.
what they're doing rather than having that need to have too much control over exactly what everybody's doing in their team. And there'll be times where they have to. There'll be
Yeah.
times where they've got new starters that they need to be very closely working with to get that person up to speed, because that person's not yet got the skills to do the job. They need to work with them, train them, coach them, etc. And then there'll be other times where they do need to just step away from them, leave them to their own devices while they focus on their own stuff.
Yeah. It's managing expectations to
Yeah,
summarize a lot of what you've said there, isn't it? And that
yeah,
is their own expectations, but also the expectations of their team members that this is when I'm available. And I think very often, and I know you'll be having similar conversations, but with a different hat on, the conversations I often have when I'm interviewing billing managers that they do feel inadequate. They don't feel like they're, which is hence why you're needed. They've kind of landed in that job because they've done really well, or maybe somebody's left, or maybe they just happen to have, carved out a niche in a particular area, which we do often see. And just going back to your kind of altruism versus, selfish, let's use that word. I thought it has a very negative connotation, but just for ease. And I think some of the best leaders I've ever seen, some of the best billing managers, I should say, that I've ever seen, have not been the best billers.
yeah,
And I think it's where very often when I've got billing managers out on interviews, they're not going to be rocket, mind-blowing figures, but look at what they've achieved within their team. I've always thought a good billing manager should cover their costs, wash their face, whatever expression you want to use, feel that they've got a real value because they understand the market. They know what stakeholders are facing in terms of pain points. They know the talent pools, that they understand the diversity dilemmas that are out there, but they are sharing that information across their team rather than just holding on to it and making more and more money for
yeah,
themselves. So I think actually, very often I think your job as a trainer and my job as a rec tech isn't necessarily to train the billing managers. It's the people, the founders, it's the leaders above that need to actually understand that
yeah.
it's a reframe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's a big part of it. So I think the role's underestimated in a number of different ways.
Yeah.
And I think what I've seen numerous times is that it's been quite a while since the person who's promoting that person into the manager's job has made that move themselves. And by quite a while, I'm not suggesting that this person is much older than the person that they're promoting, but even a few years helps to kind of dull down that panic sometimes that I see billing managers have. And I remember myself, I'll come back to that in a second. Um, but it kind of reduces that over time. that
Mm.
goes away. They forget what it felt like and
Mm.
therefore underestimate what that person needs to support them. Big part of why I do what I do is I remember when I first moved into the job. So I was promoted. I knew I was being promoted, so it wasn't something that was planned or that happened overnight. It was an expansion of team.
Yeah.
It was grow your desk to this point, and then we can start splitting it, and then we can hire. So it was all planned. In a role a few years prior to that, I'd been identified as kind of a team leader, not a manager, but a team leader. So I'd been exposed to a couple of pieces of training. One of them was on coaching. And I kid you not, after a full day of being on this coaching training that was supposedly going to arm me to coach other people around me, the only thing I remember from it was that they taught us how to fold a water lily out of a napkin. I kid you not.
Oh my God, that's ridiculous.
So,
I wondered what you were going to say then.
so
Useful for a dinner party, I suppose.
now, can I remember now how to fold a water lily out of a napkin? Absolutely not.
Oh my
But it
God, no.
certainly didn't equip me to help me coach people around me.
No.
So I moved into the job and I remember coming home feeling so frustrated, feeling upset, feeling like an imposter in the
Mm.
job. Why have they promoted me? I'm not doing a good job. I don't understand what they saw in me to promote me into that role. Felt as though I'd been literally thrown in the deep end.
Mm.
And at the kind of 6 month mark, started looking for a job and sat down for my next review with my manager, who was absolutely lovely.
Yeah, yeah.
But I felt the need to look as though I was coping. I've been told many times over the years that I have swan syndrome, where you're kind of paddling really hard underneath, but look perfectly serene
Yeah, yeah,
on the
yeah.
surface. And found it really hard to tell her that I was struggling in the job. Um, and
Well, because it's a
she
sign of
it's a
almost a sign of
sign of
weakness.
weakness, absolutely. And it's not comfortable to do that, is it?
No.
So in a review,
Admitting your failings, so to speak, but it's actually the complete opposite of that.
yeah,
And the only way you can sort of advance your development as a future leader is to actually own up and say, I'm
yeah,
out of depth here. I need
yeah.
to have some support. Interesting.
So in a review, she just kept poking and saying, "Are you really okay? What's going on really?
Very
What's going on under
sensitive.
there?" And I just blurted out, "I've been looking for a new job and I didn't want to tell
Oh
you."
my God.
And she obviously then went into a conversation as to why. And I was planning to move to a job where I wasn't managing because that was the bit that I didn't feel I was doing very well.
Yeah,
And after that conversation, she got me booked onto some formal training. And I just flew from there. So
yeah,
I remember how much impact
yeah, that
that
has.
really good structured program had for me over probably a 3 or 4 month period that I was attending sessions for that. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, I love that. I love that that's your why, and you're never going to forget that. I
Yeah,
think anybody that I ever interview on this podcast who has, myself included, when I set up my business, it was your own personal experience of how it shouldn't be, and then
yeah,
correcting that, and that being your carved niche, which I think is brilliant.
yeah.
So when you're partnering those firms who clearly are investing, they're clearly prioritizing what I can only describe as their future succession planning. What do you think that best practice should look like that other leaders listening can look at? So, for example, we are in a very challenging market. Attracting, I know you don't train trainees, but we all need to think about, in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, what's our future talent pool going to look like? So, what would you say companies should be looking at now when it comes to succession planning through their billing managers? What are the key things they should be looking at?
I think first of all, it's looking at what's the business strategy. So what are we going to need and over what kind of time scale? So what do we need to fit to a plan? Kind of identifying those key roles, identifying the skills and mindset and behaviors as well that those people are going to need to help grow the business in that direction. And in my opinion, that's not just for billers, it's for non-billers as well. So it's looking at have we got the right structure being grown internally? And if not, are we starting to connect with people externally so that we already have those connections for when we're ready to recruit? But it's doing the basics right. It's making sure that there's regular talent reviews in there, that you understand the motivations of the people that you've got in your team so that you're identifying the people who would want to take on those more senior roles or who would want to grow perhaps laterally as well as going upwards. Because as businesses grow, obviously more roles are created that might be at the same level as opposed to more senior ones.
Uh,
Um, and having regular conversations with them to make sure that what you understand are their motivations and their desires for the future still remain that. I'll never forget a conversation with a director of mine from a previous role who used to tell the story of a manager that he'd had in his branch network, as he would have referred to it, who he wanted, it was a senior consultant, sorry, that he'd identified as the next branch manager that was going to be moving to the next town over to set up a branch there. And all his plan was related to her motivation and wanting to do it. And when he'd signed the lease for the new offices, she then said that she didn't want to do the management role. So it's having that regular conversation and making sure that what you understand is what that person wants is still
Wow.
what they want.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
that's wonderful. I mean, if that isn't like the lesson that we should have all learned in COVID, is that human beings are, we are changeable things.
yes,
Just keep auditing, keep understanding your people. And I think that's actually something that underpins true leadership. It's, asking those questions, getting that feedback on a continuous loop, and
yeah,
no judgment, no
yeah,
judgment. But if she
completely agree.
decided she didn't want to do that, I think that's really, really good advice. And I think, look,
Yeah.
nobody has a crystal ball as to what's going to happen, but I think, succession planning, it starts with communication.
Yeah, completely agree. And then the other thing that I'd add into it is start exposing them to the things that they would be doing. So start developing them in that direction. So start
Okay.
delegating tasks to them, getting them involved in things, creating roles or projects or secondments if you're a big enough business potentially to do that, but opportunities to get them exposed to, get them involved in, so that as and when you're ready, the business is ready for them to be promoted into that role, it's not all new.
No, I agree.
Um, this is a weird analogy to use, but I've been doing some yoga recently.
Okay.
So I've started this beginner's yoga class, and I think about the weirdest of things at the weirdest of times. So yoga's reminding me, and kind of linking it back to this for me, that when we start a class, she tells us what we're aiming for at the end of the 45-minute
Yeah.
class, but
Hmm.
we build up to it. So she
Yeah.
doesn't throw us into crow pose as she was
Yeah.
fairly ridiculously trying to get us to do as beginners the other night.
Yeah.
But she starts getting us to do stretches and to move our bodies in a certain way that are related to where she's trying to get us by the end of the session. And to me, it's no different. It's the same as you wouldn't chuck somebody in the deep end to teach them to swim. They might have done in the past,
Yeah.
but you don't do that anymore. You start building up the skills and
Yeah.
the confidence so that then when they are in the deep end, they
They
can
know what
cope with
to
that.
do.
And
Yeah.
I don't think it's any different in a business environment. So getting them doing certain aspects of the job that they wouldn't have done previously,
Actually, can I just
it's just
say,
stepping stones.
commercially, the amount of billing managers I interview that have never even been shown a P&L, even of
Mm,
their small unit, their division. I mean, come on, we're not idiots. You don't need to be an accountant to be able to read one. But the amount of times and I'll say, "What's your budget?" And they go, "I don't know." And I'm like, "You don't need
yeah.
a budget." Like, but I was managing a budget in my very first team leader role. And I then saw for the first time what gross profit was, what net profit was. I started to control my costs when it came to I'm not joking, even things like where we were buying coffee from, because it was impacting
Yeah.
my net fee income. So
Yeah.
I actually love the yoga flow analogy. And I think anyone that's, if you do any kind of sport, if you do any kind of exercise where you are building and learning and adding to it, it's just apart from anything, it's practice, right? It
Mm,
takes time.
yeah.
I think that's really I love the way that you've kind of almost neutralized your advice for succession planning, because actually it's just good leadership, communication, and it's that consistency. I promised at the start of this intro to our podcast today, Brian, that we were going to get a little bit controversial. So I'm about to chuck some numbers in of our own here, which are the older 360 versus 180.
Hmm.
What are your views? And then I know you're going to ask me mine. So, what are your views on what do you think about the two models? Or there are lots of models because there's also layered
Yeah.
models 70. Talk me through what you think is the best model.
Um, I started in a role as grad trainee where the job was layered over a period of time. Um, and it's tended to be the approach that I took when I managed and
Yep.
the approach that I took when we were writing training programs and things. Starting people off with the candidate side of things, build the credibility with candidates, build the confidence with candidates, build their skills with candidates, and then start to expose them over time to the 270 role and then the 360 role. Not all businesses have the luxury of being able to do that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I see businesses doing wrong, in my opinion, is not highlighting enough to them the selling that they're doing at candidate level.
Hmm.
Because I think that I see quite a lot of consultants and speak to a lot of recruitment leaders who say, "Oh, I've got all these people who are doing the candidate side, but I can't get them. I can't move them into the business development side because they're just elbows out and kind of literally hanging onto the door frame to prevent me moving them into that team, to do that." And the conversation that I would always have with somebody with that is how much do they know they're already doing of the selling piece in the job that they do now?
Yeah.
So if they're trained a sales process and then it's related to candidates,
Yeah.
when they're then exposed to a sales process that's related to developing clients, it's familiar. It's the same, coming back to what we're talking about with building them up to be managers. It's the same thing.
Cool.
Um, I think that there can be slightly different skills and motivations that would make people suit one role as opposed to
Great.
the other, far more so. Um, but I think a lot of it comes down to how many businesses can afford to run a business model where they can have people who are doing 180 roles and 360 roles and 270 roles, just to be complicated, um, and not necessarily doing the whole piece.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I do agree with you actually. And I started out in a 180 role, but it lasted about, I think about a week. And within about a week, I was asking to speak to the clients who were existing clients. So therefore, I became a 270. And within about 4 months, I was just like, I'd get so frustrated with the chap that was running the account, who ended up becoming my second husband. He's no longer married to me, but that's how we formed a real friendship. And I just started picking up the phone and business developing
Yeah.
myself. And it's kind of like I transitioned into it. In fact, this was all before my pre-training with Bill Boardman back in 1999 at the time, I think. But I think it's something that I think there are some topics that are just always going to get talked about.
Mm,
And I see the evolution that we're currently in 2025, which we're just on this really fast trajectory now for the next few years, while AI impacts, as job boards have, as LinkedIn has, we're on the journey now. But I think most companies, and I actually disagree with you a little bit because I don't know if it's about a
So
luxury.
right, we promised to be controversial.
Promise. I don't know if it's a luxury, but I think if you, as a business owner or a founder or a senior leader, can recognize where people are best suited, you will get the best productivity out of them.
Completely agree.
I've seen, there's two clients I'm thinking of in particular who are, micro businesses. Their profit margin is unbelievable. They're actually both in search, interesting. They're both in retained search. And the business owner in both of these companies is solely responsible. All they do is the client side. All they do, they don't do any delivery.
Yeah.
And they have a team of, 3, 4, 5 people that they do, you would call it a 270. They'll introduce them, they'll go when they've won the business, they'll go meet the client and then they run the whole project. And these people are billing, the talent partners are billing 3, 4, 500,000 pounds a year, not
Yeah.
having to do any cold calling, but the MD's doing all that. Now, is that scalable? Is that sustainable? Well, it depends what your business wants. And when you're
Yeah.
listening to now, if you're a massive, huge business, but you can do that sort of microcosm within each team, I believe, and play to people's strengths. And I think that's why we'll keep going around the houses, because whenever we go through any downturn, you've been through downturns as a recruiter and as a manager and then as a trainer, we are in one at the moment, there's no question. Everyone seems to treat anyone that isn't a 360 like some kind of leper or pariah, and it's absolutely shocking. I'm working with some people at the minute who are exceptional at what they do. They're brilliant at running campaigns. They will find the most diverse talent, but they don't cold call, they don't BD, and
Mhm.
it's actually really challenging to place them. And they're keeping a brave face on it. They're attending the interviews, fresh as a daisy. And you just think, crikey, what we're missing a trick. These are
Yeah.
the people that will deliver. So I really wanted to talk to you about it. And I think we should keep talking about it. And we
Yeah.
need to keep educating our audiences, because ultimately, I think we're missing out on some really great talent that don't necessarily conform to the 360.
Mhm. I
Touch
agree. I
point here.
remember, yeah, in the same vein that you're talking about the recruitment business owner who does all the business development, I remember in one of my very early jobs, one of the supposedly 360 recruiters, and he was a 360 recruiter. I shouldn't say supposedly, but he was appalling at the delivery side. So winning the business was a massive motivation to him. Getting the jobs on, having that briefing conversation with the client, but then after that, arguably he was bored. He
Mm.
didn't really want to do the rest. So you're right, if we can just play to the strengths, does it have to be this is our business model across a whole organization, or can it be this is our business model in this team and this works for us?
Absolutely. I think the conclusion to that part of the conversation is be adaptable to the people that you have and make sure you are attracting in diverse people with the skills that you need, even if they don't necessarily fit that job description. You can amend a job description to play to that person's strength. So I don't think that the 360 model is dead, but I think it has to be adaptable. That's my
Yep,
conclusion. You
yep.
happy with that? So before we let you go and carry on doing the amazing work that you're doing, what would your parting shot be to the best advice to anyone that's looking at investing into their business right now, particularly when it comes to learning and development?
Okay. Um, while a lot of businesses are probably focusing on the less experienced, getting those people up to speed, obviously I'm going to say it. But I think the businesses who are focusing on the recruitment leaders and the managers are getting the biggest bang for the buck from what they're doing. So if you can take your managers, junior leaders, and develop the skills that they've got to help them develop their people, you kind of what's the phrase? Killing two birds with one stone,
Yeah.
I guess, in some ways. So if you
Yeah.
can train them to be great coaches, great
Mm.
mentors, if mentoring's a slightly more appropriate approach than the coaching, but if you can train them to give their people great feedback, coach them well, delegate to empower them over time, not just to get rid of the rubbish jobs that they don't want to do, but strategically delegating jobs and tasks and
Yeah.
projects to help develop them over time, I think that that's where the greatest ROI comes from. Um, whether you're doing that internally or using an external resource to do it, the businesses that I see having the greatest impact from it as well are those that are investing in spending time or using it as an external resource as a coach for those managers. So it's
Yeah.
not just attending a training program where they're learning the skills, it's then helping them on an individual basis, or small groups to help them embed that learning, drive accountability for it, and help them apply it to their own individual circumstances.
Yeah.
I think the days of being able to send people on something that's just 1 or 2 days and tick a box, yes, we done, are gone. I don't necessarily think that was ever right, but certainly I think that employees have a greater expectation in the support that they get.
I love it. We're going to create a cascade effect. Bryony, I knew you'd be amazing. Thank you so much for joining me. Have you enjoyed your
I
experience?
have indeed. It's been great to chat about it.
Well, hopefully this will be the first of many. And obviously in the show notes, all Bryony's details are in there. If you're interested in her lean into learning, I think you would be absolutely crazy not to do that because let's face it, we all need to upskill our leadership people and create this brilliant cascade effect. Thank you so much for joining me on the show. Really appreciate it.